So this is one of the reasons I hate the term DevOps engineer with passion, right? Because it's counterproductive. It actually hurts.
All right. So, welcome and hello to all our listeners. And today we have with us Baruch Sadogursky. He is the principal developer advocate at JFrog. Is also a passionate conference speaker. Did Java before it had a generic. Did DevOps before it actually had Docker, and developer relations before it had a name. So he's a really cool guy, and he's also a co-host of DevOps Speakeasy, as well as co-author of the Liquid software and DevOps tools for JavaScript developers, which was actually published, I think, in April of this year, 2022. And you also may know him as the guy with the hat. Beside that, we also have with us Tomer, the CEO and co-founder of Novo. So hi, Tomer and Baruch.
Hey,
Hey, Emil. Hey, Tomer. Great. Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
thank you for joining us, Baruch. And Emily, just forgot one thing that I think it might be as important as the other. Baruch is one of our advisors.
Yeah, I know. I think I really felt bad of not mentioning it, but yeah, Baruch is one of my favorite people, and beside the fact that he is our advisors. But yeah, I probably would jump back to it in some way or another.
Yeah, and that's something I'm very proud of to be on the board of advisors of this amazing company and try to um, do to improve the developer relations that we do. Yep.
So, Baruch, would you mind sharing something we may not know about you, or something that we could not find on you online?
That's a good question. I'm pretty transparent with what I'm doing online, so most of it you probably can find. I enjoy bungee jumping. I don't know if that's something that also you can find online, but probably harder than other things. It's not on my LinkedIn profile, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that anything that you cannot find on your LinkedIn profile is basically something special. I mean, what you said, bungee jumping, is it like something regular, or it's something like?
Yeah, I try to do it every year, at least once a year, from like in different locations, bridges, rocks, whatever I can find. Yeah.
So, actually, in preparation to this episode, I've discovered that you are really you have a really profound engineering background, especially with DevOps, and I would like to maybe go a bit on what I know and what I've learned about DevOps, and I believe that Tomer could as well. But I actually would like to get your perspective on what is DevOps for you nowadays.
So that's a very good question, especially considering how like the hype, what the hype of DevOps did to it, right? So it started with a very a focused mission of bringing developers and operations together on empowered teams to take ownership and by that providing better software faster. Um, and then because of the hype it went to different directions. So today we have most of the industry considers DevOps as an engineering aspect, and basically I think we can kind of say that it's automation of system administration work. And that's wrong, that's misplaced, that actually hurts the true notion of DevOps, because instead of demolishing silos, it's actually created a new silo or transform an existing silo of ops into or system administration into something else. What it doesn't do, this categorization, is actually DevOps. And obviously, when we have those silos still remain, the problem of silos is still there. So we will probably sooner or later come full circle to discuss the problem of this silo and we will come with DevDevOps, and that will be a new idea of bringing developers and DevOps engineers together.
I think kind of I've witnessed DevOps develop from, and I think you're right. I think the basics of it was in old time businesses. You'd have the developers and you'd have the IT, and those somehow need to be converged. And a lot of time you'd see, no, the infrastructure runs great. No, the app runs great, but why is it not working?
Exactly, exactly. And this conversation will continue now between developers and DevOps engineers.
I've seen dozens of companies hiring professional DevOps services, which is breaking the whole notion of the engineers should be ultimately the ones who are owners of the IT infrastructure as we knew it. Obviously, it's different in the new world, but at the end of the day, you need servers to run your app, you need databases to run your app, you need cache services, you need everything you need. And the people who ultimately should know what's going on there are the engineers, are the developers, because they are the one who taking usage of those systems. And the way DevOps is perceived today is as a, and even that it's not big enough, but it's kind of a glorified IT prospect, which is A, wrong just by the idea, B, doesn't tell you anything because IT is such a vastly definition, and especially in our new days where cloud is huge. What is a new DevOps? I mean, I don't know. Ultimately, it should have been the way to break silos and make sure the developers know what's going on. But the hard truth, it becomes a new role. No one knows what it actually does. It could be anything and everything, and the silo is still there.
Yep, yep. So this is one of the reasons I hate the term DevOps engineer with passion, right? Because it's counterproductive. It actually hurts. Automating of IT practices and system administration is very, very important. No doubt about that. But this is not DevOps.
Right.
Well, I think we will need to come up with new acronyms or something.
I actually think what we aim to do here is break the new silo that is DevOps and make sure engineers know why they should familiar themselves with Dockers or cloud services or Kubernetes or all of those things who are perceived to be DevOps and ultimately are services engineers need on a day-to-day basis in order to fulfill the job correctly.
Okay, so there are some big cloud computing platforms in the world, like we can name AWS, GCP, Azure, and then we have also, yeah, not that big, but also DigitalOcean and Heroku, and now we see even those kind of front end developing tools such as Gatsby JS, Vercel, and Netlify. What do you think is the parameters we need to think when we choosing what to work with?
So I think that what really matters is how risk averse your company or your project is, right? All those new shiny toys, especially in the JavaScript or front end area, are great, fascinating, and very interesting to learn. It will obviously look good on your resume and your GitHub profile, but the real question is your company or project or even team or you yourself ready to be agile enough if or when you discover that whatever new shiny toy you picked is not delivered or abandoned or pivoted or is just not good enough. And right, and if you are agile enough and risk tolerant enough, sure, go ahead, knock yourself out and try new things and enjoy them. But once you have responsibilities to other people, to customers, to other teams, you need to think twice before you jump on the next shiny toy.
So what I can say here is my motion is three pillars of innovation, which means in every department, in every aspect, you can only innovate three times every single time because or every period, because otherwise risk become too big. But with that being said, I think looking into all of these technologies, whether we're talking about the big AWS or some small new Netlify competitor, all of them are on a high level should give the developer the ability to become the DevOps within the organization, which means breaking down the silos. So I love the aspect of it. With that being said, I do tend to agree with Baruch. And specifically for JavaScript, because that tend to be kind of a Hail Mary approach where everything becomes a new toy and you have to play with it. Go ahead, play with it on your free time, but on your company, when it's production purposes, make sure you know what you're doing and your team knows what you're doing. Otherwise, the risk becomes too big. And a lot of the time, to be frank, there isn't any actual wins out of it. Um, because, I mean, looking into I mean, I have nothing come in mind, but I mean, a lot of times you could have just done it using Kubernetes, and it would be run fine, and it's a well-tested technology, as opposed to just kind of using this next shiny, technology.
So basically, what I hear from you two is a technology could be actually we could rely on some tools only if they standard the some time frame that it was tested, that it has a community, that it have enough support around it, or or it's basically just was chosen and then to put the stamp of a big company on it, which just provide a lot of resources and value into it, and then it's also make it some kind of a safe choice.
And this is where we want to look for the safe choice, which is, as we mentioned, not always. We should take those risks and those opportunities with new technologies. We just need to do it responsibly. As Tomer said, maybe isolate areas in which we are more risk tolerate because they are not as mission critical as others. Maybe do POCs, try new things. Absolutely, we definitely should do that. We just probably shouldn't gamble with our core competency that customers, users, and partners, and who's not depend on it.
Right. And even if you do want to do so, find a risk-free way to do so, right? Create a different brand, create a different product, find a niche group of your
To
customers
test
who
it,
say,
yeah.
you know what, I'm happy to be your innovation partner, and
Hmm.
I know it might screw me over to some extent because it is new and unsafe. But I mean,
Hmm.
I want to be the organization that is innovation partner that that can say next month, I invested my time, my money, my people, my focus into whatever technology.
Hmm.
It could be done even on very mission critical items, but in a manner that keeps both the organization doing so as well as their customers in a safe free environment or a
Yeah, but,
safe
yeah.
ish.
Yeah, whoever bet on Kubernetes 5 years ago now is a very very happy camper.
Right.
And but also whoever bet on other technologies that we don't even remember their names, you know, had to switch to Kubernetes later and probably spent a lot of resources doing that.
Okay, so just the takeaway from this last point is that as a company, you should be transparent and responsible for what you're choosing, and it's really important to also collaborate and to um, just have this even talk with your customers who are willing to take this bet with you, and this will be kind of a responsible approach to do it. Um, Got it. All right. So right now we will do probably a bit switch to kind of in premise, but different area. So in what cases the company should consider going on a managed solution, and in what cases everything should be like I said premise before, but managed on premise.
So I think there is, especially today, the answer to that is you can do everything, right? Uh, Hybrid solutions are here and they're here to stay. And I remember even a couple of years ago when we in JFrog spoke about hybrid approaches that both on-prem and cloud working together. A lot of people kind of raise their brow and say, "Hey, we're going all cloud. Why do you need on-prem?" But today, I think that the industry kind of it's came to realization that we cannot just give up on-prem uh, and go all cloud. And even the project which were born cloud native, like Kubernetes that we mentioned all day today, are going back full circle and do something for on-prem. And that's because there are good reasons to do to have some of your infrastructure on-prem. It can be anything from being again extremely risk averse and not trusting the cloud with some of the most sensitive data that you might have. Or it just might be a business decision in terms of how do you spend your money to get the most out of it. For the majority of the usages, yes, cloud provides a better cost benefit solution because it can scale, because you don't need to take care of some aspects which might be done cheaper by the cloud provider because of economy of scales. But sometimes there are definitely scenarios that having your own hardware actually makes it cheaper, makes it more efficient, and those scenarios are not neglectable in terms of the amount of usages uh, that they needed in. So I think, yes, I would say we were in 80-20 on-prem versus the cloud 10 years ago, and now we might be exactly the opposite. But those 20% or whatever the number is of on-prem is definitely going to stay. And when you think about your next solution and you think should it be in the cloud or not, yes, probably the default today is the cloud, but on-prem is definitely a valuable option that might worth considering for certain usages.
And on top of that, I think there's something kind of you started with it, and I want to kind of reiterate, which is the hybrid solution, right? I mean, back in the day, you had only two options: on-prem and cloud, and now we have this new cool kid called control plane or private cloud, which is it is cloud native, it is scalable, modern technologies, everything is just as cloud, but with the additional benefits of being within the private cloud of the said company. So almost no security concerns, almost no PII concerns, and on the hardware the company chooses to be to the extent of private cloud gives them. So there are new solutions these days, and I think, I mean, admittedly, I think cloud usually is the best options to go right now because it's faster, easier, give both sides on this kind of commerce what they need. But a lot of times, private clouds beats that, especially when you work with bigger accounts, bigger companies, where PII or security tend to be something that is out of the questions, right? No one, if we're talking about a second about the risk, no big company would risk that, right? No big company would risk their PII or security.
Okay. So yeah, some of the main reasons that at least I read during my research was regarding the security issue. But yeah, actually, all what you said even makes more sense because security is obviously not the only part that should be considered in this kind of question. But I'm actually happy that we touched security because I would like to know when it makes sense to allocate resources on security?
Always. Security is tricky. Security is nasty because you always need it, and it's very complicated to an extent that you either don't get it or don't want to get it or cannot get it, right? There are so many aspects and so many layers of security that, you know what, it's uh, sometimes you just say, well, that's too much. It's not something that I can do, so I will do less, or that's outside of my area on expertise. I don't know how to do that. And all those answers, while valid, they actually are very, very dangerous, because you cannot just ignore security because this is something that you don't know. On the other side, even if you want to make sure that you know everything, is just so damn hard, complicated, and multifaceted that it's very, very hard to do right.
I'm taking the security approach a bit differently. Back in the day, security was, if you asked about security, the answer was easy. No one cares about that. It's not concerns for engineers. No one cares, right? I mean, if you want security, hire security engineers. What's that? I don't know, but hire them. Uh, but these days, writing code security or taking a look into how you provision your servers, your cloud, everything is part of the engineer's job. They need to be aware of that. It's not a question of when a company, or of if a company is being hacked or attacked. It's only a question of when. And now taking all of those learnings, the way to know when to invest in risk is risk assessment, right? You need to create a small matrix of saying, you know what, I'm afraid of this and this and these actions, and for an adversary it would cost, whatever amount of money, and now you need to choose your relevant risk assessment, saying, you know what, I don't think someone would invest more than 50K a year attacking me, right? Okay, so what mitigation process should I do in order to prevent that, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and we're talking about exactly the same thing, right? My point was that it's very easy to neglect. It's very easy to neglect because it's very hard, and we try to avoid work that is both very complicated and also outside of our area of expertise. And unfortunately, we cannot just avoid security or delegate it to whoever is it. It's a job for everybody, and it means that it requires a lot of effort, both organizational and individual, to make sure that we are on top of our threats. Doing this risk assessment is one thing, but eventually doing the job of mitigating it is something completely different. And this is a discipline that we must develop, although it's hard, counterintuitive to the entire notion of trying to make our life easier and simpler, just because if it doesn't hurt right now, we still have to do it, despite the fact that it doesn't hurt right now.
And by the way, that is the default solution of security, right? When you work on it for most of the time, it doesn't hurt you in any way. It's preemptive measure. And I do want to add something that is, I think, kind of going against the grain of breaking down silos. So back in the day when you have IT knew about IT security because it was part of their job. Right now, when you move this ownership into engineers' hands, and engineers' job is to write code, is to develop the product, it's not as accustomed to them. And especially when you give them not only the code security reliability, you give them the actual cloud infrastructure reliability, where they're unaccustomed. I've met dozens of engineers who have no idea what ports are. It's just the number after the dots, which it is correct, but I mean, it's just a bit more than that. Um, so when you don't know the internals of what you're trying to do, it becomes so much harder to protect.
Yeah, all right. So I'm just going to continue. Um, So right now, I would like to steer our conversation to talk about CI/CD. We can work with many platforms today, as we said, GCP, AWS, Azure, and each provides many deployment tools from Google's Kubernetes engine to AWS Elastic Beanstalk. How do we make the decision of which tool to use?
There are generally two approaches, which is true for any like IT decision, and that's what it's called the best of class, or how do I forget the other term, like when you take everything out of the box. But generally, that will be your trade off. Do you want to take a tool that you consider the better that you can find, even if it doesn't work with other tools out of the box in your portfolio, and then you spend some time making sure that they work together, or you take one everything in a single solution from one vendor or one tool, and then compromise on those features or others, just to spare the work of trying to integrate all the tools together. And I think both approaches valid, and it's just a matter of assessment. How much do you need to give up when you steer away from integration work?
Yeah, I think, I mean, one thing I'd like to add to that is back in the day, it was, I'm looking into all of those solutions. It was extremely hard to move from one provider to the other. These days, as Baruch mentioned, JFrog and other companies and other solutions like Terraform gives you the ability to quickly move between them. And so it's not necessarily as hard as it was. With the one of the pitfalls is you need to stay on the light surface of what each one of them can actually give you because it's extremely generic. Now that might be, a good enough solution for you, but sometimes, both I think what you were looking for is best of breed. Sometimes you need the best of breed, and you can't, afford to move away from this specific feature you just have to use.
So you're just selecting on where you prefer to invest your time to solve your particular pain or your need in particular feature is basically how you select where you should go and where you just should put your camp. But as Baruch said, it's basically also if you can and if you could do it, you should stay as in the high level as possible. So if you will need something in particular, you don't need to allocate that many resources to move from one place to another. Is it
And
right?
then goes and this goes back to standards and common APIs,
Mm-hmm.
which bring another trade-off of, do you
Mm,
want to use a specific feature, as what Tomer mentioned, for example, for GitHub Action,
yeah,
or you want an easier migration and the lack of lock-in. So
got it.
it's all trade-offs. As we today's podcast is trade-offs.
Trade-offs.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. All right. So for startups, it could be really tempting to try and implementing CI/CD in early days, but clearly it's also a big time consumer. And startup might change because just it could be the code could change many times in different stages. So I would like to hear your opinion on when is the right time to think about implementing and think about those CI/CD processes?
Well, today it's as basic hygiene as having a source control, right? We are way past the time that, all right, we will build on my machine and deploy it from my machine for a while because we are too small. There is obviously this is something not acceptable in 2022, and as it's clear for everybody that you have to have GitHub and or any other like source control in order to develop. It's the same for CI/CD processes. There is no way around it today, and but it is day zero. It's pretty much when you set up your your source control. That's the day you set up your CI/CD. It can be something simplistic. It can be something very basic, but continuous integration and continuous delivery are is basic stuff that you start with.
So, as again, what I can hear is that it's also give and provide the developers some kind of a peace of mind. So, yeah, okay, got it. Actually, I think that it's also kind of going hand in hand with the our next topic, which is related to the fact that I'm the person that speaks mostly with our open source contributors, and a lot of them just asking me and the other maintainers about they asking some kind of advice or help because they just interact with many issues when they're trying to set their project, because they're trying to set the Docker, set the dependencies and everything, and it's just kind of breaks. So what do you think could resolve and ease this process of this kind of a friction?
I think the most important advance in those areas was obviously Docker, right? Docker allows you to just build a machine that is the reference environments for the reference environment for everybody to use, and then just make people use it, or at least look at it and run it and understand how it works. And Dockerizing as much as possible is the easiest way to start working with an unfamiliar environment. Another very, very important aspect is the quality of your build, because the build itself also provide guidelines for how your project should be understood by others. And I will give you an example which kind of exposes my age and maybe my experience. Maven, which is a Java build tool, when it started back, I think like something like 15 years ago, one of the amazing advances that it brought to the table is that it was a project comprehension tool, and that was their highlight. Maven, it's not a build tool, it's a project comprehension tool. What it means is that if you have a project that is built with Maven, you know exactly what to expect where. You know where the sources are, you know where the resources are, you know where the build files will go. And this structure of the project that is mandated by the build tool, by Docker, by or any other type of virtualization, actually helps the developers to understand what is going on.
That's correct. I think um, the most either script or full automation you can provide would make every new contributor life significantly easier, because I mean the amount of times you are facing some, I don't know, miscellaneous library failing because you are running Python 2.92 as opposed to 2.93 is just overwhelming, the amount of times it happens. And that is a specific example with Python. You can see that on basically every other library. And so as long as you're able to either provide a script or full down automation, or ready to use Docker, is going to save so much time. Admittedly, in some cases, it does kind of raise the bar of the minimal know-how in the contributor side. But overall saying, I think it is positive that people know what Docker is and how you should run it in your local machines. So
I think that we have a real game changer that I believe that if will be correctly implemented and used at least in the open source kind of realm, I think it could really bring a lot of contributors and to lower the friction. And this tool is Gitpod. I don't know if you heard about it or not, but basically it means that every time that you just getting into some repository over GitHub at least, you can just go into the issue. You understand the problem. You understand that you probably have some kind of the knowledge on how to solve it and how you could bring value to this specific project. And all you need to do is just press a button, which will just uh, set the basically just bring the machine with all the dependencies, all the requirements, and everything. And all what is left for you to do is just work on the issue. And then, of course, all the process of the CI is already implemented there. And it's giving you this solution, this kind of an authority of not thinking about do this always context switches and no maybe go deeper on how to set up all the right things. So what do you think about that? I mean, this is mostly probably more cloud native approach that you do everything there, but it's kind of new and I think mostly unfamiliar to most developers and not really used enough, but I think it's a good step in the right direction.
I think there are two types of work, if you wish, when it comes to development. There is this one of jumping between contexts and different issues and maybe even different projects, in which having something like that, that you can just dive into a specific context right away, and even with the downsides of not having the environment completely set up on your machine, is beneficial. And then really when you need to switch a lot between environments and what's not. On the other side, there are a lot of use cases when you want to work on a particular sprint dedicated to a project, a topic, an environment, in which case you would prefer setting up everything locally to get the speed, the lack of latency, and be able to execute everything locally. So, depending on your type of work, the cloud environments can be very beneficial, but it's not that you want your local environment to be able to easily set up using all the techniques that we spoke previously as well. So it's not instead, but it's definitely a good solution for this type of, you know, rapid patching with context switches in different projects.
Yeah, so actually our producer Nevo is also mentioned that it's a good way for juniors to kind of get their hands dirty and get into the specific things. But yeah, of course it's a trade-off, and you need to consider and decide on it only if it's really served the purpose of doing it.
Yeah, and speaking about onboarding and juniors, just a shout out to another very interesting project, which is called Wilco, which brings gamification to the table, right?
I think we have ideas for our next episode for this podcast, and I believe that we could arrange that because it sounds really interesting. But yeah, I mean, we could talk about so many more things, but I would love. Actually, we'll need to wrap up this recording. And Bo, could you maybe briefly share maybe a resource that you think could be valuable for founders, CEOs, something that maybe it could be an advice, a book, anything?
If we're going back to what I do those days, and especially um, with Novo as well, that will be a book that is called "The Business Value of Developer Relations." It's completely out of the blue. It's not related to anything we spoke about, but it will be an important resource for everybody, especially the founders and management, to understand what developer relations is, why it is important and how it brings value to the table.
So thank you, Baruch. Thank you, Tomer, for joining into recording this episode. You were amazing. I really loved the conversation, and I really hope that you enjoyed it as well.
No, I did. Thank you for having me, and I guess that's not the last time.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. And Baruch, thank you so much for joining.